And we are recording. First of all, this channel is proudly sponsored by the Red Room. Please check out the link to their store in the description and in the pinned comment below for exclusive tabletop RPG products you will find nowhere else. Thank you. And welcome everyone. I am your host, Abraham El Jaguar. Today I will be interviewing David Martin. He is the winner of the first MechaTop World Tournament. Thank you for being here, David.
Thank you. It's great to be here.
Now, David is going to talk to us about MechaTop, the tabletop system that allows you to use any tabletop, any gunpla, mecha miniature, any sort of model. You can fill that and have exciting battles. But before we go deeper into those things, David, could you tell us about the current projects of MechaTop? Are there any ongoing tournaments, any Kickstarter, and whatnot?
So we're currently fine-tuning the details and the rules for this year's World Tournament. And in terms of on the development side, we are working on fine-tuning, translating, editing the campaign books for the next expansion. And we also have a couple of larger projects that will be involving Star War or starships and infantry type characters. So we haven't released too much about that yet, but there are some big additions to the MechaTop universe. So stay tuned for details on those.
That sounds pretty amazing. Now, before we get into more technical things, could you tell us about your background when it comes to tabletop gaming and mecha in general?
Definitely. So I haven't had too much experience with a lot of different tabletop gaming. My first experience was with Dungeons and Dragons, and that led to some interest in Dungeons and Dragons miniatures. And that's really where I got my start with the more traditional tabletop style gaming. My brother and I actually developed a number of different systems to use various action figures we had when we were younger as miniatures. So we spent a lot of time doing things like that. We got very into the Heroscape miniatures game, and we also developed cards and ways to add other units, other action figures, other miniatures into that system. So I've come into it kind of from the angle of wanting to add and customize and create with existing systems. As far as the mecha angle, I was introduced to Voltron, Robotech, and Zoids, and then Gundam was the one that really pulled me into the mecha genre. Since then, I've watched almost every Gundam series. I own a couple of them, and that in turn led me into the modeling. And Gunpla models have been one of my biggest passions for years now. I got into the toys and the models when I was younger, back in the 90s. Took a bit of a break from it, and then about 7 years ago, I got seriously back into modeling, and that coincided with MechaTop, and the rest is history.
Do you have a favorite anime mecha series or manga series?
So I think one of actually my two favorites that jump out to me from the Gundam franchise in particular, the 8th MS team. I love the more grounded, gritty type of tone that series took, and Stardust Memory, because it took a more realistic look at the sometimes super robot feel of Gundam. So I really liked the tone of both of those series, and the animation still holds up pretty well today.
Yes, those are great series. I really like the realistic angle to them.
Mm-hmm.
Now, when it comes to MechaTop, how did you get into this tabletop system?
So I stumbled on the first Kickstarter for MechaTop before it was first released, and I was instantly intrigued. I loved the idea of being able to use the models to play the games. So I backed when the Kickstarter first went live, and even before I got my physical set, when I was able to download the advanced copies since I had already pledged, I immediately started playing solo games to learn the rules and to get familiar with it myself. And then I introduced a close group of friends who had also been interested. Some of them had backed the project as well. And that core group became really the nucleus of the MechaTop community in our area. and I submitted an entry for the first MechaTop tournament through Facebook, and I just missed the cutoff to be one of the 8 finalists, and then one of the members of the tournament dropped out, and they approached me as the runner-up essentially to step in. So that was how I joined the first MechaTop tournament, and I was lucky enough to win that tournament. And since then, I've participated in every world tournament, every team tournament since then. And the group of friends that I first taught, we've become more and more active and involved, participating in the group projects, in the tournaments, in the Facebook group. And we were officially asked to join the MechaTop team to help support developing, testing cards, and working on the new additions for MechaTop and for the upcoming expansions.
Now, I'm just getting familiar with MechaTop, but it seems to me that there is a lot of flexibility when it comes to how you can enjoy this system. So I was wondering, if someone were to be a highly competitive player, would you say that MechaTop has enough depth and complexity to achieve that sort of play style?
Absolutely. That was really the biggest thing that jumped out to me, was that there's a balance of simplicity to be able to learn the game and the mechanics in the course of an hour or two. I've done workshops to teach players, and I'm able to get them playing within an hour of introducing the concepts. But when you add layers like, adding pilots and their abilities to the mecha, there are upgrade cards which can augment abilities, weaponry, and can really impact your play style. So, I mean, even changing one unit's abilities can drastically change the presence on the battlefield, the way your team plays, and the way your opponents will then try to react to how you're playing. So there's a psychological aspect to it because of the way the game flows with trying to anticipate your opponent's moves. So there's a lot of flexibility, a lot of freedom to customize not only the units that are available, but the point system allows you to create custom units, to either modify existing units if you want to change loadouts, or build new units from the ground up. So if there's not a unit in the library that has a couple of thousand cards already in the MechaTop library, but if there's not one in there that's exactly what you're looking for, there are rules to create a new unit from the ground up. So there's absolutely room to do pretty much whatever you want to do while still getting the benefit of a well-balanced and enjoyable game.
What would be the standard size for the gaming table for the battlefield?
So the standard size is 6 feet by 3 feet. MechaTop does sell plain mats that are that size, but really that's about the size of your standard 6-foot folding table. So even if you don't have a mat, just a 6-foot by 3-foot table, or even a 6-foot by 3-foot space on the floor is enough to get started.
That's excellent. And when it comes to the scale, any scale of mecha works with the game, correct?
Yes, there's tables in the rule book that show you the differences in movement speed and ranges depending on what scale you're playing in. So on the unit cards, you will see not a value in numbers or in distance saying it moves this fast. It will say a movement rate, and that rate, how much that actually translates to, depends on the scale. So that way, every card in the MechaTop library can be played at any scale just by using the appropriate values. And once you've been playing for a little bit, those values become second nature, and you'll just know them as soon as you see them. But yeah, you can do it at scales from 1/72nd, which is a common for like armors and military modeling, all the way up to 1/400th and even 1/2000th scale when we get into the larger scale battles with kaiju and other giant units.
Now, the only thing that remains constant is the octagonal base, correct?
Yes, the octagonal base is the platform that pretty much all units are deployed on, and that is because the rotation and the angles of fire, the field of view, use the 8 sides of that base as a guide. So that's why the 8-sided base is so important. Smaller vehicles like support vehicles, tanks, helicopters can deploy on square-shaped bases because those are the smaller ones. But MechaTop is also working on getting smaller octagonal bases to use with those support units. So yes, the octagonal base is the standard for deploying units for that reason.
Now, something that I found really cool about MechaTop is the reaction, the counterattack subsystem, because it recreates those anime moments of the clashing of swords, the when two beams clash together and you have those anime sort of situations. Could you tell us more about that?
Yes. So, how MechaTop is played, there are 5 button tokens. Each one corresponds to different actions that your unit might want to take, like attacking, moving, changing weapons, or reloading, or holding to combine to do a more specific action, like an aimed attack or a double attack. Now, each turn, you assign 2 of those buttons to each of your units. And then when it's your turn, you can choose to use both of those tokens to do actions, or you can hold some of those tokens in reserve and then use them to react to your opponent. That could mean if your opponent fires on you using a movement token to try and dodge, or if certain conditions are met, like the type of weapons that both are equipped and they're in range, you can do a counterattack, which might lead to beams. If their beams being fired, they can clash and then there's a beam struggle. Or if you're in melee attacks and there are beam sabers or similar melee weapons, then you have a sword struggle where they clash, and then the attack can go either way, and it can lead to some very dynamic, very epic moments that really pull all the players and even the spectators really get excited. And it feels like you're recreating a battle from an anime with the fast pace of the attacks and the reactions. And that's where the psychological component really comes in, because if you decide to hold a button token, there's no guarantee that you'll get to use it that turn. Whereas if you use all of your button tokens to attack, then you have very few options when your opponent then attacks you. So there's a lot of strategy, there's a lot of depth that comes into play. But I love the system because it gives you so many options on different ways to play.
It does look like a high stakes situation, or sometimes significantly risky, because it says here if a player scores 5 plus more than their opponent's result, that player will complete their attack when it comes to beam versus beam. But then it says if there is a difference of 4 or less between the two totals, both units will suffer damage. It cannot be blocked or dodged, equal to the sum of the damage caused by the two weapons.
Yeah, that can easily lead to a situation where both the attacking unit and the defending unit take massive damage, and even potentially destroying both units in that one turn. So yeah, there's a lot of risk involved. But on the defending side, your opponent attacks you, and now you've not only neutralized that attack, you've taken out both units. So strategically, that can lead to some really interesting options as well. So yeah, there's a risk reward for every reaction, and that again will inform everyone's play style. Some people will try to go for the risky, really flashy, really dynamic results, like, oh, I'm going to counterattack and try and have this massive explosion. Versus a more conservative player might say, well, I'm going to attempt to dodge, or I'm going to use my shield, or even if it's a missile attack, I'm going to try and use my mounted Vulcan cannons to intercept the missiles before they even get to my unit. So there's a lot of different ways you can respond. But yeah, some of them can be really quite catastrophic if it doesn't work out just right.
It makes sense because, like I said, it kind of recreates those anime moments quite perfectly. Now, when it comes to your mecha being destroyed, does this happen when you lose all of your structure points?
Yes, structure points are essentially the hit points of each unit. And when the structure points are reduced to 0, then that unit is destroyed.
And when it comes to the pilot, are there ways for the pilot to be eliminated even though the mecha is still intact?
So yes, so the pilot can suffer what is called stun damage, which occurs when they are hit with either an ability or an attack that gives like blunt force, like a shield charge that slams the shield into another unit, or if they are within a certain proximity of an explosive attack, that can also cause stun damage to the pilot. And when a pilot accumulates a certain number of stun points or stun damage, the pilot is knocked out, and at that point, the unit is then vulnerable to any attack that is accurate and hits it will automatically destroy the unit. So even if the unit has, almost full structure points, if the pilot is knocked unconscious, then it is vulnerable to being eliminated with a single attack. There have actually been tournament matches that were ended that way, where a unit with a lot of hit points left was eliminated because the opponent accumulated lots of stun damage to try and exploit that avenue. So it is definitely possible for the pilot to be the weak link and vice versa.
Now, one of the selling points of MechaTop, in my opinion, is that you actually feel as if you are in the cockpit of your mecha. Do you actually feel that sort of immersion when you are playing?
Absolutely. And that's really enhanced by, I mentioned the button tokens. The tokens, they actually are little round tokens that look like the buttons you would press on the console in the cockpit. And when it's your turn or when you're reacting to your opponent, you do have your hands hovered over those tokens to press whichever one you want to move or attack or to react to your opponent. And it does that level of, it does really make you feel immersed. It does, you feel that tension, you feel that anticipation, you feel that excitement of being the one to control and to command these giant robots in battle. So it absolutely, it pulls you into the experience and it just brings it to a whole other level. You forget you're just playing a tabletop game, and you feel like you're really in a battle yourself.
I also like it that you encourage people to play online with their own models, because nowadays we have virtual tabletops, we have all sorts of apps and software, but the magic of actually using your models, I think it is irreplaceable. What can you tell us about the online scene of MechaTop?
Yeah, definitely. So actually, most of the tournament matches are played online because competitors are from all around the world. So that's a really common format that we use. Zoom, Skype, any similar web chatting service can be used, and it just requires the players to communicate very clearly how they are moving their units, and then checking in with each other to make sure that the ranges and the angles match up, confirming, okay, this unit is here, it is this far away from this unit or from this landmark. And in that way, both players can have a representation of the battlefield in front of them to plan their moves and attacks.
Now, when it comes to the solo system, how satisfied are you with how the artificial intelligence proceeds in MechaTop?
I really enjoy the AI card system that is used for solo. That's actually how I first started playing the game. When I first got the rule book, I got the solo cards as well, and it really does randomize how the opponent is going to react to your moves. It does feel like you're actually playing against an opponent and not just, oh, I'm just playing against a simple AI or something that I can predict exactly how it's going to respond. There's a deck of cards that will tell you which two buttons the AI has selected for that unit, and then how it is going to use those buttons, whether it's going to be aggressive, whether it's going to play defensively, whether it's going to, switch from a ranged attack to a melee attack, or whether it's going to hold the buttons in reserve to dodge or counterattack instead. So it really does feel like you're playing against an unpredictable opponent. So it does give a pretty good approximation of what it's like to be playing against an opponent that's thinking and reacting to you.
I also like it that the AI system is also included in the core book, so that way, if someone doesn't is not too much into using cards, that person could randomly determine the patterns or the tactics of the enemy. Now, when it comes to playing online, did you ever run into a sort of situation that the positioning or the direction or the attacks were not clear, or everything flowed smoothly for the most part?
It flows pretty smoothly. What we do, especially in tournament matches, when the results are very important and we want to be very clear, we'll have one of the MechaTop team members or administrators generally present, overseeing on either with one of the participants, or the MechaTop member is actually the one with the physical battlefield, and they're the final say on how close things are or where the angles line up. So there's at least one battlefield that is designated as the official one, And that's the one that then everyone else can mirror and confirm whether the measurements are correct and what the battlefield looks like. So that way everyone has one standard that they can use so that it lines up. So that system has worked very well for us for the tournament matches.
That makes a lot of sense. Now, when it comes to building your team of mechas, is it somewhat complex, or is it easier than first perhaps thought of by different people?
So the team building it's simple in that every unit has a point cost. And whenever you're getting ready to start a match, the first thing that's agreed upon by the players involved is what the point limit is for each team. For the standard MechaTop tournaments, it is 1,800 points. So you would then select units that their cost totals up to 1,800. And if you have units that are just over or just under, there are upgrade cards that you can use that will either add points by adding equipment or weapons or special abilities, or there are some that will decrease the cost of your unit by, say, this unit is battle damage, so it detracts 50 points from the cost. Or this unit is outdated, so it is less efficient at turning or can't boost and move as effectively. So in that way, there's a lot of room to, if you want to try and pack as many units as you can into a team, you might use more low cost units and go for numbers. And the maximum amount of individual units in a MechaTop tournament is generally 5. So you can try and pack in 5 units to, have the advantage of numbers. And there are some players that have gone the complete opposite route and chosen one extremely powerful unit, and that is the entirety of their team. So there's a lot of freedom in terms of selecting the different units. And then if you want to rely on upgrade cards to make up a significant amount of the point cost, that can change how the team plays. I mean, I've played games where I've had up to 250 of my 1,800 points were dedicated to upgrade cards. And that allowed me to parachute drop in one of my units behind my opponents in the middle of the game rather than deploying it in formation at the beginning. Or you give them different abilities that make them more difficult to hit from distance by giving them a stealth coating if you want to protect a unit till it gets into effective range. So the team building is simple in that it's just the point cost that every unit has, but you can get much more detailed with different upgrade cards and playing around with the cost that way.
I actually saw one of your matches, and to my appraisal, I think that something that really gave you the edge in that battle is that you were quite aware of the distance of your weapons. You almost immediately identified when the opponent got into just the right distance, and then you counterattacked or attacked immediately.
Yeah, that's part of my play style. I have a more of an analytic, precise play style. I like to have a pretty specific strategy. And obviously, as the battle develops, you have to adjust your strategy. But each round, I go into it with a priority of I'm going to deal as much damage as I can to the first unit to come into range to try and reduce the opponent's, numbers immediately. Or sometimes it's as simple as I want to make them hesitate before they bring the rest of their team into range, even though I know I can't destroy any of their units. By attacking them several times, it can give that psychological edge of, okay, maybe I can make them more cautious, which can then give me time to reposition or reload or adjust the loadouts of my team. But yeah, I like to be very aware of my long range options and coordinating my team to make sure the whole team can effectively move to support each other.
Now, when it comes to teams, do you have a preference? Do you prefer a few powerful models or perhaps a larger force?
I like to go with a little bit more of the numbers. My teams, I don't usually field teams with less than 3 units because I find that having more units gives me a little bit more flexibility to adapt to whatever my opponent is going to do. Even if that means that one of my units is just a tank, which is 120 points, relatively low cost, but it can provide long range support fire that can over time definitely whittle down opponents. and can give you the edge over the length of a longer battle when it's drawn out, or helicopters, which can be deployed, from ambush later on during the battle to unleash a lot of damage very quickly, even if they are then destroyed within the next round or two. One well-placed helicopter that unleashes a double salvo of missiles can turn the tide of an entire match. Even if the helicopter is then destroyed, the damage is done. So I like to use a larger number of units to give myself more flexibility and more options to respond to my opponents.
I also really like it that there is an ability, a Voltron type of ability that allows you to have this huge mecha and divide it into smaller mecha, or vice versa, the other way around. You have smaller mecha that come into one. Have you ever seen that used in play?
Yes, I've seen it used not in any of the tournament matches, but amongst my group of friends who are now team members as well. We've experimented with some of the super robots and their abilities to divide and attack from different angles, which is really interesting in terms of gameplay, because generally the super robots are more expensive units. You usually see maybe one on a team. So being able to split them into multiple units can really shake up the dynamic, can really throw off your opponent's strategy if they're trying to surround and attack a single unit. If suddenly they're facing two, or in the case of Voltron, 5 units, it can throw their whole plan and their formation into disarray. So I've seen that used to really good effect, and it's definitely a lot of fun to have that option of fielding an army or a single powerful unit.
Now, since you have a strong root when it comes to tabletop role-playing games, how easy would you say it is to make the transition from tabletop RPGs to MechaTop?
I think the transition is pretty simple. It uses D6s, which is, it doesn't use a lot of different dice, so it's less cumbersome in that sense. And the rules are very straightforward with what roles correspond to what, and what you have to roll to respond to whatever your opponent is trying to do. The roles to determine when an attack will hit, or what an attack needs to roll in order to hit, depending on if it's held in two hands, left or right hand, or if it's a mounted weapon. And then how difficult it is to defend against. Like beam weapons, you need a higher roll to block rather than like a machine gun or a physical weapon. But I think it's a pretty easy transition to anyone who's played tabletop games, because the concepts are similar, of having to roll for your armor and defense, of having weapons have different rates of being accurate and hitting or missing. So I think it's got a lot of those global concepts that will easily translate to anyone who's played tabletop games. Even if the specific mechanics are not exactly the same, I think the overall feel is similar enough that anyone who's played tabletop games will be able to pick it up pretty quickly.
I also really enjoy that the campaign book feels a bit like a tabletop RPG campaign. They are not just like a collection of disconnected scenarios. You are being taken through this overarching plotline. Have you actually played the campaign?
So we have actually played cooperative campaigns um, amongst the MechaTop community in general. The creators fielded, there was a kaiju based RPG scenario campaign where there was a series of missions conducted with pilots throughout the world. And depending on victories or defeats, each player was awarded points, and those points we could use to upgrade our pilot abilities. So our pilots were able to then use more significant abilities, or augment the abilities we already had. So our pilots felt like they were gaining more experience and more abilities as the campaign progressed. And that's exactly how the pilots are laid out in the campaign books, in the rule books. The abilities have costs next to them, and if you're playing a single match, you can decide, okay, everyone is going to have 200 points to allocate abilities to their pilots. Or if you're playing a campaign, you're awarded a certain number of points for each victory, and you spend those points to give your pilots more abilities. So in that sense, it is like a traditional RPG where you can have that sense of progression and feeling like your pilot's becoming more powerful. And some of those abilities can make a huge difference in the way your battles play out and the way your mecha perform.
Now, if someone wanted to get into the tournament scene, how would they go about it? Do you need to pay a fee? Do you need to go to a specific site?
So to participate in the tournament, you just have to have a MechaTop base set. That's the basic box. And with that comes basically a tournament entry code that's associated with you purchasing that set. So that's the only requirement you need to be able to participate. And then if you're going to participate in person, being within proximity of the person you're going to play, or you can play virtually using, computer with a webcam or a phone and any of those, Skype or Zoom type apps. But those are really the only requirements to participate.
Now, before we wrap this up, do you have any thoughts related to anything, to MechaTop, to Mecha, to the tabletop environment in general, etc.?
I think MechaTop is a great option for anyone to get into because most of us already have the models and or action figures or miniatures or something that we want to play with. So many of the traditional tabletop games, the cost is really a big barrier for people to jump into it initially because you have to buy all of the individual units that you're going to want to field, and most of them then you have to paint and assemble and that kind of thing yourself. With MechaTop, you can use obviously model kits. You will be assembling them yourselves, but action figures of all kinds. So you can really play with anything. So I think it's much more user friendly to immediately jump in with a lot of options available for you to play. So I encourage anybody who has any interest in Mecha, in tabletop gaming, or just doing something fun with your friends who have similar interests, get out there and give it a try. I mean, it's a way to make use of your models that you've probably never considered before, and it really gives you a new eye for modeling. Now when I'm looking at model kits, I'm not just thinking about the quality of the build or any customization options I want to do for the build portion of it. I'm thinking, how would this perform in MechaTop? Is there a card for this? How will this go with the team that I'm already playing? Or can I build a team around this new mecha?
I think that accessibility is important because some people, well, they are just getting perhaps into Gunpla and they think that you need to be this super painter or this super Gunpla builder in order for you to participate. But I can easily see people getting a real grade, high grade, any sort of grade scale model to participate in a MechaTop tournament, and that would be allowed, correct? You don't need to paint it perfectly and all of that.
No, absolutely not. There's no requirement for the level of complexity of the build. I mean, even if you wanted to use an SD Gundam and select the card that goes with that unit, that's totally fine. Any unit, no matter their skill level or experience with building, any unit is accepted. As long as there's a card that goes with it, then you're good.
That's great. So you heard it. You heard it here, folks. You can use any model, any scale. You can enjoy your hobby in different ways. Now that you have MechaTop, you can employ all of those models on the battlefield. Well, thank you so much, David, for being with us here today.
Thank you. It's great. It's been a great time.
And as always, everyone, please remember, it is better to roleplay and fail in character than not to roleplay and fail as a player. Once again, thank you, David. Please send me any links that you want me to put in the description of this video via email, and I will make sure people are directed to those sites. I am going to stop the recording in 10 seconds.